Okay, thank you, Tams. And just to start, I'd just like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Kulin Nations people, the traditional custodians of this land from which we're meeting today, and pay their respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And before we begin, I'd just like to say also that every time I come to an adult literacy event and an acknowledgement of country is made or a welcome to country is made, I think back to what those literacy practices would have looked like 200 years ago or 250 years ago, and they'll be very different to the literacy practices that we're talking about today. Knowing how to, look up a dictionary and know the Roman alphabet wouldn't have been that handy. And I think back to literacy practices, we know the expression, we read the word to read the world. I think about, what reading the world would have looked like then. And it's far more, would have been nature, the environment, would have been different languages, song lines, dream time, storytelling, and thinking and tracks and stars, and thinking about that then makes me think about, well, I wonder in 100 years time or 200 years time, what are our literacy practices going to look like? Will we be speaking English or other languages? Will we be communicating in the written word? And will it be, the Roman alphabet as we know it? It's, interesting to think that our literacy practices are changing, and we can see nowadays, obviously, our literacy practices are changing as AI and robotics and data is becoming more important to understand. However, in saying that, contemporary society is dominated by, still today, the written word, and to actively participate, individuals do need to be able to, in Australia at the moment, read, understand English and understand the written word. And I guess that's what a lot of our work is about, and why we're here today, to help people to access that written information and enact in the world. In saying that, we know that people who perhaps don't read and write as well as they would like to, and have some unmet literacy needs, it doesn't mean that they're not participating in society and contributing to society. Many people have lots of attributes in their working life, in creativity, in their families, but it's still important, I think, that if given a chance, that they have access to the written word as well. So I'm now going to start, and I'm just going to stop the my video. So if that will come up, and it did before. Georgia, why won't it let me now stop my video?
If you go up to the top where it says you are sharing your screen.
Yes.
If you click that drop down, or is there an option to stop your
here
camera?
It is now. Yeah, it wasn't there. I'm just going to do that. Wonderful. Okay, pulling it all together. Okay, so I've been asked today to pull some of this information together, and you may have noticed me lurking in the background. I've been a bit of an online lurker in this program. I haven't been one of the participants, but because my topic was to pull everything together, I thought I better know actually what they're doing. So I have, of course, read the materials in the online portal, and I have looked in and read a few of your comments and discussions, which have been great. So I've been part of you, but I've also been separate to you. So that's who I am and why I was there. And when we do PD, and particularly intensive PD like you've been doing over the last 4 weeks, there's so much information to take on board, and it can be very difficult to make sense of it and to keep it all together and try and remember what you want to remember from it. As Karen Dimke would say, we need to receive, process, store and respond. And I guess one way of doing that for me is to do like a flow chart or come up with some kind of model that helps me remember. So this one worked for me. I was reading a paper about adult literacy, and they kind of put it together in this kind of way. And I thought, oh, that's a good way of thinking about it. Of course, it's kind of arbitrary in some ways, and there's lots and lots of crossovers. So, but I decided to look at it in this way. And as Tasman has already said, looking at the brain, the person, the learning environment, and the cultural context. And I'll just be touching on what some of the speakers have talked about, and occasionally maybe adding a few other things as well. So today you are coming here as yourselves literacy and numeracy practitioners, but you also need to put your hat on as a train the trainer, because of course this will be your last webinar for this professional development. And soon you'll be going out there into the big, brave Learn Local world and recruiting some other adult literacy and numeracy teachers like yourselves. And you will need to be thinking about, what is it that they may want? And they of course, like our learners are quite diverse, they also may be quite diverse. Some of them might be experienced language literacy, numeracy teachers just wanting a refresher or some information or to be part of something, a network. Others may be teachers but come from primary schools or high schools and have that kind of experience. Others may have worked in the accredited literacy numeracy space before, but not the pre-accredited. And some may be experienced pre-accredited teachers in particular content areas like sewing, hospitality, woodwork, but not have any explicit training in literacy or numeracy or adult learning. So there'll be a range of skills and knowledge there. So, and you will be an important resource for them, but also, of course, you have all the resources on the portal and all the videos as well. Okay, next slide, starting on the brain. Okay, so these are just some of the things that came up with the brain. What does neuroscience tell us about adults and learning, and in particular literacy? I feel like there's been such a growth in this area over the last 20 years. When I was going through Teachers College, I think I remember neuroscience being mentioned, but now it's mentioned a lot. It's considered very important, and I've actually heard people say that, we should rename ourselves not teachers, but neuroarchitects. We'll probably get paid a bit more money if we called ourselves neuroarchitects, perhaps. But it's become very important to understand learning through what the brain and neuroscience can tell us. So, plasticity. Can you teach an old dog new tricks? And it appears that we can, thank goodness. So although neuroplasticity does decrease with age, adults are able to continue to learn and to continue to rewire their brain. It might slow down and they may need more practice, but they can still do it. For reading, it can be hard, as reading skills require some adults to unlearn things that they've learnt in the past, and things like invariance as well. Invariance is when you get that mix up between 6 and 9, B and D, D and P, that kind of mirror imaging. So it can be really difficult, but it can be done. As a couple of our speakers have talked about, they've talked about the importance of memory, and memory can be a strength for adult learners, but they do need plenty of support to practice, and in particular to practice between sessions. So it seems that adults are quite good sometimes at remembering in class, but not between classes, whereas children apparently seem to be able to remember between classes a little bit better. So that's something that we need to remember. And I think it was Shemin that was talking about retrieval learning. So being able to retrieve what's being learnt as an important part of memory. She also talked about the 9 different types of memory, including sensory memory, working memory, semantic memory, procedural memory, and others. And she had a few tips in there about, for example, priming as a way to train the brain to do similar activities. Also, the brain is important for the building blocks of literacy. And I think, listening to what Rosie had to say, there was a lot of that about letter-sound relationships and graphemes. Metalinguistic awareness is considered important, and that has a phonological aspect to it and a morphological aspect to it and an orthographic aspect to it. It seems that adults are quite good at the orthographic, so the spelling patterns and visualizing words, say visual words, but often they rely too heavily on the visual patterns of words and their world knowledge. If, for the very low readers, the readers having problems, they don't have the phonological skills, so the sounds awareness, and the morphological understanding, so the smallest units of meaning. So I guess that's something that is for consideration in our teaching and learning. Also, we had 2 speakers, Lino and Karen, who talked about what happens when something happens to our neurological processing. And that might happen because of effects of trauma. And Lino talked about that with more detail. And obviously Karen talked about how people can learn differently because of the way that they have special learning difficulties, or you could say special learning differences. And, she said that up to 15-20% of people seem to have not necessarily dyslexia, but dyslexia-like learning differences and other learning differences as well. And it seems that trauma also can impact on our learning and replicate those kind of neurological differences as well. And I think, well, for our learners, perhaps then if that's the case, it's not like 15-20%, if we consider the trauma in people's backgrounds, and particularly now with the Royal Commission into Family Violence, we can see the children even witnessing violence and growing up with violence, let alone some of our learners who have maybe come from overseas for war, might actually affect the neurological processing. So it's a big thing, I think, with learners in our class to consider that impact. Okay. And so what were the implications? And these are just some of the things, and I'll quickly whip through them. So we should do spaced learning and retrieval learning. Be actively engaged, connect with doing, so applied learning. Enact our motor system, so writing letters to recognise them. Adaptive learning, so the material that learners engage with gets progressively more difficult with constant challenge, but the right amount of challenge, not too difficult. So it's building self-esteem and success. Explicit presentation has been found to work, and obviously multimodal presentation. So I think Shemin said this, support with text and image is good, but not spoken text with written text. And engaging all the senses as is relevant. Feedback is important, and executive function is also important. Executive function can be a strength of adult learners in that often adult learners do have good attention compared to children. This is, good attention and control of abstract thought as their prefrontal lobes of the brain have been developed, and they can ignore distractions. However, if we're talking about some of our learners that perhaps have had trauma or have special learning difficulties, that might not be the case. And Karen did talk about a disorder called executive functioning disorder. So obviously they would need help with that. Okay, the person. As you would know, we never know who's going to walk into our classrooms in adult education programs. Our learners come from many diverse backgrounds and they have diverse interests, strengths, and needs. These people may have left school early for whatever reasons and have some unmet literacy and numeracy needs. They may be aware of what they want to learn and maybe some of the difficulties they have, or they might not even know what it is that they want to learn. They may have effects of trauma or learning difficulties or brain injuries, or they may not. They may have just missed out on learning and need to learn in a safe, psychologically safe space. Our learners also can find, learning how to read and write as an adult can be very slow and frustrating and demanding. So, and there's many reasons why they may stop coming to class, like transport, childcare, finance problems, problems at home, health. So we have to think about the ways that we can actually design and deliver class that increases motivation, engagement, is relevant and builds on resilience. And a lot of those things also were mentioned by our speakers. So there was a few things there. Supporting learner autonomy, so giving people choices, obviously designing programs that are relevant and meaningful to them, and maybe reflect some of the knowledge that they already know. Explicit learning and teaching. Build on metacognition strategies and reflecting on goals. Making expectations clear. Building on their strengths, and a growth mindset, which I will talk a little bit again about. And then the other one was looking for signs of learning differently. So Karen did provide a checklist, I think. And again, it might be good just to go through that checklist and have a look at what are some of the signs that people may be learning differently in the classroom, just to be aware of it and maybe what you can help them with. Okay, the learning environment. Now, I haven't got a picture up there, and it was because I was looking for a picture that obviously I was allowed to use, that I had free access to. But I also, if we think of our learning environment, it's also, I couldn't choose. It's so diverse. Many of our learners in pre-accredited programs are in standard classrooms, but many are just in spaces in libraries, men's sheds, community hubs, kitchens, sewing rooms, gardens. It really depends on what the class is that's being delivered. Nowadays, of course, also it's being delivered online. So we have virtual classrooms where we're video conferencing through lots of different mechanisms into people's homes. And this latest development, of course, has raised lots of challenges, but also lots of rewards. And it'll be interesting to see how that will be supported into the future and what will happen. But it's also, I guess, interesting to think about all those things that make a good learning environment face-to-face. How do we do that in the online space as well? And I know some of you have got lots of experience now in that. So just thinking about other aspects of the learning environment, duration and intensity. I think the jury's out on that, in terms of, I did hear one thing, reading in a European thing about as much as possible, of course, but something about 9 months, 6 hours a week at minimum, with lots of practice in between. We're lucky in Victoria with Learn Locals and the pre-accredited programs that we do get to do 20-hour programs, but we can make it up to 120-hour programs throughout the year. So I think probably more is best in this space as much as possible. Making sure the physical environment is inclusive, and that can be inclusive in lots of different ways. I'm sure you consider that. Class rules can be important, so everybody knows what the expected behaviour is and they know how to contribute, and they know how to respect others and what's expected from them. Of course, in lots and lots of studies, the single biggest factor in determining success for students is the quality of the teacher. And in that, I guess it's the pedagogy or the andragogy that's behind the teaching style. So breaking down what makes quality teaching, of course, is partly what we're doing. But I think it's also that connection that the learners have with the teachers and feeling safe, respected, and that they can ask questions. That's so important as well. Modelling good learning behaviours and adapting learning materials. And again, I think Karen's checklist had a lot about adapting learning materials, perhaps to people who were challenged with dyslexia or other neurological problems. And they can be easy things to do that don't impact on others who don't have those issues. It's kind of one of those things where you don't need to diagnose people. You can just look through those things to go, oh, can I make those changes to my teaching? It doesn't really affect anyone, but it might be helping some people. So I think it's a good idea to look at them. In terms of modelling good learning behaviours, in terms of feedback and error correction and things like that, it's been suggested that teachers, and I'm sure you probably already do it, model that to your students, reflecting on your own learning or how your own classes have gone and asking for feedback from your students. So it becomes a really acceptable and normal thing to do, to give feedback, and for people not to take offence or feel like they're being singled out. So Dale, what did you say? It surprises me that there is an expectation that adults with literacy and numeracy issues will learn to read and write in record time. Yes, given that children are 12 years. Yeah, children get about, 2,000 hours of really, intense attention and time to learn. And yet adults who've missed out or have issues learning are expected to learn so quickly. I agree. I think sometimes we should send bureaucrats to another country and make them learn another script in 80 hours and let them see how they go. No, okay. Just talking about modelling positive learning behaviours, that this is something that Lino touched on, and I couldn't find Lino's example from her research, so I've just grabbed this, and I think it's a children's one, but you get the idea that some of our students can have very negative mindsets and can say negative things in the classroom, and that as teachers we need to be listening out for that and seeing how we can change it. And I've put down the bottom there, 1, 2 and 3. 1, I'm a bad speller. 2, I don't like reading. And 3, this is boring. This is boring probably comes from more of a youth class. A lot of our older adults would never say that. They just might disappear. But I was just wondering if you would like to contribute now, answering how would you change that in your classroom if you heard any of those things? What kind of cues could you give them? And you can answer 1, 2 or 3. You've probably heard those things in your classroom before. How could you try and reposition what they're saying to you? So if somebody says, I'm a bad speller, what could you say? So I might answer that one while I wait for others to type in something. So I'm a bad speller could redirect to what part of the word are you having trouble with? And you can actually redirect once you've talked about, sounds and what the sounds say, and if they know their syllables, and if you've done syllables, it can be, oh, it's the second syllable, or it's the middle part, I can't hear it. So then they start to talk about the sounds or the middle bit or this bit here, rather than it's my fault, I don't understand. So they're redirecting themselves to the actual learning at hand. So I can't see any coming through at the moment. Dale said, you should see my spelling in Japanese. Yes, I can imagine. Okay. And would you like to read this interesting text? It's about football. Yes, get them into something that they're interested in and something perhaps that they can read about and understand. Wonderful. Okay. Yep, slowly breaking it down together. And sometimes I say, if you can spell one word, you can spell 1,000 words, and find one that they can. Yeah, so from what they know. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, I'll just quickly go through these ones. Yeah, don't worry about the spelling now, we can fix it later. Yep. As long as we do come back to it later, and that can be a good opportunity to actually take what it is that they were stuck on, go home and do our research and think, what is the best way to actually help them do this? And if they're having troubles with it, well, then probably others in the class too. So turning it into a learning experience. Okay. Laura says, I draw comparison with other things that they've learnt. Yep. Before you learnt to drive and you weren't a bad driver, you just haven't learnt those skills yet. Yeah, that's right. Learning's, we're all on a journey of learning. And I always, I can show them my dancing and my drawing and they won't feel so bad about themselves at all. Okay, there's some other things quickly. Adapting learning materials. And I won't go through those, but they're kind of what I mentioned at the brain stage as well. How can we adapt our learning materials to help? Okay, next one, the cultural context. So why have I got a pink phone there? Basically, the pink phone's to remind me of a story which illustrates a point. And the story is, I remember reading somewhere, I don't remember where it is, but reading somewhere about women's literacy in, I think it was Bangladesh, and how, women's literacy was really low, but they really wanted to learn, but because they were working and had family responsibilities, it was really hard for them to come to class. And so the program decided that they were going to teach by SMS text messaging because they could actually access women at home. But then the problem was the men were stealing the phones, taking the phones. And obviously, if there weren't any other mobile phones in the household of maybe some of these poorer communities, you can understand why. So they made the mobile phones pink. And so the men didn't want to take them. And I guess that's one way that perhaps is gender stereotyping a little bit, but is maybe applicable to this cultural context. But it's important to realise that our learners too live within a community, and that if we want to engage with them and engage with their learning and make sure that they continue learning with us, we need to understand the needs of the community, remove any barriers that they may have, and find ways to connect and practice outside the classroom. And do you have a post-program plan? I think with Learn Locals, we are really lucky because, part of what we do at Learn Locals is connect with our communities, and often we have other things going on in our community centres apart from just classes, which could be, community groups visiting or free lunches, etc. So we do connect with our community. And in the A-frame also, there is a space for us to look at what next for the learner. And normally that is looking about maybe other learning opportunities or work opportunities, or maybe going into accredited training or vocational training. But it could also be about linking people into other networks in their community and trying to find places for them to actually use their literacy skills. So Dale says, other cultural contexts, many of the students complain that their children hogged the computer and thus they could not learn online. So interesting, during COVID, talked to many of those children, and then they've become allies and even assisting with homeschooling with their parents. Fantastic. And I think that's kind of one of the opportunities that has come out of these times. Also, initially, when we went into lockdown, a lot of our students, there was the whole thing about having devices, having data, and having the digital literacy skills. And some local councils did respond, normally for school children, but for people, with digital packs for families, which provided dongles, tablets, and laptops. And also, as you said, Dale, families, have then started working together in being able to access things online, particularly if you're advocating for your students. There's also, yourselves, the teachers, have had to learn very quickly into this space in ways that perhaps you never thought that you would have before this time. So, necessity is the mother of invention, as I say, and everybody's been doing it. It'll be interesting to see what happens next. The other important, I guess, cohort is when we think about, who needs to access our training. There's lots of target groups that the ACFE board has targeted over the years. And, and you need to look at that as well. And for example, women wanting to re-enter the workforce or who've been parenting for a long time is an obvious choice, in that the research shows that when women get back into education and improve their literacy, it's a multiplier effect for the society in general, because their higher literacy rates improve the health and well-being of the whole family and improve the engagement and performance of their own children, and often can improve in finances for the family as well. So it's that multiplying effect. So looking out for that in the community as well. So, and also, generally, if we want buy-in from the community to support those learners. So, and like Dale said, the children then become allies to support that learning. So looking out for those opportunities. Okay. So considering all of that, looking at the A-frame, and I didn't end up looking at a program as such, but looking at the A-frame and where does some of this fit in terms of using the A-frame. So the pre-accredited quality framework, the A-frame's a curriculum document model that we use for our programs, and it includes lots of practical tools for planning and documenting learning programs. And, as far as the ACFE board's concerned too, it provides some consistency and helps to ensure quality. It actually has like 9 booklets that goes with it and a whole moderation process. But probably most of you are familiar with, and if you're not, I would focus my attention on the learner plan, which there's been a discussion about, the course plan, so the overall course plan, and the session plan. And in the session plan, this is where the teacher gets to write down, obviously, what to learn, how to learn, and then to review any changes. So thinking about what might be important, specifically relating to literacy and numeracy development, could develop a set of reflective questions that you ask yourself. And you could ask yourself pre-designing your program and lessons, or it could be like reminder questions as you reflect on your program. So the example I've put in here is reviewing changes, and maybe before you've delivered, you've kind of identified what you think is important for improving your students. And so some of the questions, I've turned them into questions. So have I adapted materials to the right amount of challenge? Not too easy, not too hard, with some stretch? Is the material presented in a clear and organised way? Have I used multiple and varied formats and examples to trigger memory in different ways to improve retention and transfer? And have I provided explicit teaching of rules and regularities of written language as provided, for example, phoneme, grapheme correspondences to improve spelling and reading comprehension? Have I spaced my presentation of material across time and checking in on multiple occasions? That's obviously just a few, and different things might be important to you that you might put in there that relate to literacy and numeracy learning. And some other ones, the learner motivation. Have I encouraged learners to be active, like produce their own materials, invent their own success criteria, choose their own topics to study or questions to select answers to write answers to, and seek explanations and solve problems they set themselves and each other. The learning environment, is it psychologically safe for my learners? Do learners know how to reframe some of their negative ideas about learning into a growth mindset? Have I focused on that yet or enough? Cultural context, how are we encouraging practice outside the classroom after formal teaching? And are we maximising social connections for our learners? And have we been able to overcome any logistical barriers to our learners to enable them to participate and learn? So that's just a few ideas of what you could focus on. And obviously there'll be lots of other things that maybe come out of this process for you that you might write down as questions to reflect on during the delivery of courses. Okay, now I should have embedded numeracy in with all the rest of it. And I tried to do that, but then it got a bit difficult. And I thought, no, I want to take numeracy out and just talk about it separately. And it's just a little bit about numeracy and my feelings about numeracy. I really, and of course I didn't want to forget the N in LLN. I really like the way that Dave talked about that, the idea of the numeracy lens, and that great activity to do. I think he got it from Ireland, where you go out and actually look at the world with your numeracy lens on, and you can see how you could do that in lots of different learning environments, including students at home putting on their numeracy lens, and that way gaining really rich material from where they are. And in context to real life activities. And I liked how we talked about the language around maths, how it can actually complicate matters. So to be very clear about the language around maths and what people are actually understanding. So the vocabulary of maths, and also the concepts of maths. I remember often with some learners, they always want the right answer and the exact answer. But actually estimating is such an important skill to do. You need to be able to check your answers and estimate quickly. And I think Dave gave the example of those boys who were in that research program, and the nurse had, given them a near fatal dose of caffeine, and really she should have been able to see that it was too much. We need to measure to be accurate, but we also need to estimate. And some of those ideas can be tricky to explain and to get across. And so what I've got up here is my favourite numeracy resource. I'm sure you've probably already seen it, but if you haven't, or if you haven't looked at it for a few years or haven't looked at it in detail, please do. So this was written with ACFE money a few years ago and is on the VELBEC website, and you can see the website address there. It's called Building Strength with Numbers. And all the activities kind of encourage people to work cooperatively and apply problem-solving strategies and do the guess and check methodology. And there's lots of games in there for people to do in pairs or as groups or individual as well. And for somebody like me who's not that confident teaching numeracy and the concepts of numeracy, is definitely my go-to resource. All of them are free, number 1 to 6, except for 7 and 8. But if your organisation is a VELBEC member, you can download those as well. And she gives lots of advice about how to teach it and how to break it down for students. That really, helped me as a practitioner break it down in my own head, and then change what she'd actually done, but have the confidence to change it to meet my students' needs. And I saw that she's also got the Getting Started, I think, part is all about maths anxiety. And I saw that Beth also had this online, it's called Dismantling Maths Anxiety. It was a Department of Training and Workforce Development for Western Australia a few years ago. But it's a video series with adult educators talking about numeracy and talking about their own maths anxiety, but then how to talk about maths anxiety with your students as well. So if you have that, I can put that in the portal. Yeah, it's worth a look. And it may be helpful for you to, maybe not for this PD, but if you're ever doing Train the Trainer again and around maths, there's got some really good questions you can ask trainers about their own maths anxiety as well. Okay. Now, the other great thing about professional development is sometimes having our ideas challenged. What's that? Yes, it could be for stage 2, that's right. So having our ideas challenged. I'm sure, I hope some of you have had your ideas challenged, because we don't want to think that we know it all. And I'm sure we will retire and not know it all. But this is one of the ideas I had challenged about 5 years ago, when I went to a VELBEC conference, ACAL conference over in Western Australia. And I went to a presentation by a woman called Janet Hardy, I think her name was. And she'd actually been working with adult learners with reading, low-level reading, really struggling readers. And they were enrolled in the CGA curriculum. And she was really trying to work out what it was that they were getting stuck with. And what she found was they were really getting stuck at the word level. So they seemed to have very few strategies for working out words. They just relied really heavily on the visual strategies, kind of what the word might look like, and guessing. But they would give up readily and not want to do it and say that's enough. So they couldn't really break it down or sound it out or have anything else. And so when it kind of came to near the end of her presentation, I was thinking, this is really interesting, because I've always wondered this myself, how some students seem to flourish, but others seem to get really stuck. And what can I do to help those students? And her answer was vocabulary development. And I thought, I thought I was doing vocabulary development quite well, but, is that it? And so I kind of left that session. By complete coincidence, my next session was with Rosie Martin, who you now know very well. And she did her session, very similar to the sessions that she ran for you, which was, about, I didn't even know speech pathologists taught reading. I thought it was all about speech. I really didn't know that speech and reading and writing were that connected. And so I was kind of blown away by that speech pathologists actually were in this space. I did not realise. And then she did some phonemic awareness with us, and she had this thing, drill to thrill, not drill to kill. So, trying to make drilling exciting. And she did some, phonemic deletions and everything. And I was kind of like, this is not what I expected that might help reading. And to me at the time, it kind of seemed old-fashioned. It kind of clashed against that holistic learning that I had learnt. And you can see up there, I guess the model that I had looked at most at the time was the 4 resources model by Luke and Freebody. I always liked that model. And its model says that, it's effective reading draws upon a repertoire of practices and resources. And to me at the time, that made sense. And those repertoire and resources do look at code breaking as well. But it was more of, we choose different resources depending on what we're doing differently. And I guess the thing with the speech pathologists and educational psychologists are that when you have a poor reader and when you have somebody that maybe does have neurological processing issues, it needs to be systematic. And so there's a lot more emphasis in that model. And one of the ones that Rosie showed us was the reading rope, where you're looking at phonological awareness and decoding and some sight recognition. And then as they become more fluent, and you're looking at fluency and accuracy and automatic. And that wasn't really something that was focused on when I went to university as a teacher. So ever since, I've kind of been interested in it. But I keep an open mind as well. And there's horses for courses. But I think it was interesting, and maybe you found that challenging as well. Or maybe this is old news to you and you're all over it. So I'm wondering if there's anything else, any other ideas that you've had challenged throughout this professional development. I did hear somebody talk about being the devil's advocate about labelling. Like, we've got to be careful not to label. And, I agree. But then Rosie talked about the power, I guess, of naming something. So I guess that's the flip side. There's labelling and then there's naming. Naming something can be very powerful to a learner, but the labelling can be very disempowering. So we need to perhaps be mindful about how we do that. Yes, double-edged. and so, I think we need to think about how we do it in a positive way. So, and I think also there was the thing about being learner-centered, but we're always teaching to a group of people. And I think that's throughout all of education, all education levels, how to be learner-centered when we're actually teaching to a whole group. Don't have any answers there, other than we always try and, focus on what the learner's needs and I guess find what the commonalities are. Okay, so I guess having this idea challenged about the reading rope and looking at phonemic awareness and phonics and thinking about where does that sit with our programs that often are experiential learning and project-based learning and applied learning, which is also shown to be really good for students. How do we fit that into these programs? And also Josie Rose talked about the contextualised curriculum for industry that ACFE are running at the moment as well. Now, a lot of those contextualised curriculums for industry that we're doing at pre-accredited level, they're also for very beginning literacy learners like PL1 and ACSF1 levels. So if those learners are stuck at the word level, how do we I guess, embed it into those programs as well. And hopefully, maybe you've got some ideas for that. So my next one is, can we embed it in this way? And you may already be doing this. So embedding phonemic awareness in phonics, we might be able to do sounding out words and spelling rather than looking up dictionaries. So focusing on a different area. Maybe embedding phonics activities into sessions at the start or at the end of lessons. So kind of like the warmers or the enders, but not focusing on it, you know, for the whole, depending on how many hours you have them, the whole day. Maybe focusing on having a sound for the week and maybe doing that for a few classes so everyone's in it together. Maybe just doing phonics for specific terms, like mathematical terms that are considered difficult anyway, breaking it down because they're considered difficult, but actually then getting to some of the letter sound relationships. Also, separate vocational vocabulary class. So if your students are actually learning something specific, wanting to go into childcare or wanting to go into construction, instead of calling it a spelling class or a phonics class or anything like that, it could be, you know, vocational terminology class, but also looking at where they're at with their words, and then maybe breaking that down to something where you can embed, have a look at their phonemic awareness and phonics as well, but relating it to what they actually want to do. Some places have spelling clubs, and some learners are quite open about their spelling problems and will share with you the shame that they have about spelling and that they think they're dumb. And so you can explicitly look at spelling with those people, but other people may not. And so you embed it into something else. Or is the right way to do it, you know, one-on-one support. There are, particularly more for young people, programs where, you know, people are taken out and really give it an accelerated one-on-one learning with someone who can really help them at those basic levels to get them up to speed, to go back into the class and feeling better because they've actually got some word attack strategies themselves where they don't have to rely on others or just guess. They actually know how to do it themselves. Okay. And then finally, we're getting near the end. So what time is it? Yeah, it's only 1 hour, so I have zoomed through. I've looked at the framework at the start where I've looked at the brain, you know, the learning environment, the person, and the cultural context. Sometimes when I'm also kind of lost about what I should be focusing on, I just come back to a mental image of this. So we don't expect trees to grow without very strong roots. And we probably shouldn't expect our learners to grow without very strong roots also. So what are those roots? And for me, I think it's like belonging to place, having a sense of identity and well-being. Those things really need to be in place in order for them to get to class and be able to take on new learning and to remember things. And so I guess in terms of theories, we're thinking back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs would be there, Rogers' view of the self-concept. Annette also talked about elements in place for readiness to learn. And so I was just wondering if you would like to share, what do you think goes down there with the roots that we really need to get right at that level before the branches, you know, can grow and the fruit can grow for our students? So if you can think of anything there. Sense of belonging to the class, yep. Peer-to-peer support, yes. Yep. Psychological safety is definitely down there as well. They need to feel safe to come to class and then to be in class. Yeah, feeling safe, welcome and supported. Yep, knowing their children are okay while they're in class. Yep. Wonderful. Now, at some point, I've forgotten to talk about vocabulary. I just want to say trust. Yep. Trust and confidence in the teacher. Yep. Oral language is the base. The more we can develop a strong oral language base, the easier it will be to teach them. Yep. And storytelling is so good. The other thing about reading that I've, and again, you might already know this, but it surprised me, is that some people who say they don't like to read have been found that some learners actually don't visualize their reading. And actually, when they've been asked, you know, to what's the picture in their head, have said, what picture in their head? They kind of thought that when picture books stopped and the writing came, that there was no more pictures. And so another method can be to make sure that your learners actually have strong visuals of what's happening in their head as they're reading, because this also actually helps with reading comprehension and to understand their reading. Also with vocabulary is inference. Sometimes it can be found that people might have surface level understanding of vocabulary, but not a deeper level. So for example, if they read a story and it says the girl was plodding home, you say, oh, how was the girl feeling? And the response is, well, you know, I don't know, there's no adjective there. And some learners thinking that adjectives, because we tell them adjectives are the descriptive words, but actually verbs can carry emotion as well. And so we're looking at plodding home. I have to say, show what plodding looks like, perhaps, and then talk about the different reasons why the girl might be plodding home. So it's kind of a deeper level understanding of vocabulary.